Hello, BookTube. There was a recent video on Kevin Towle's channel, Kevin Towle Reads, where he brings up one of the perennial bookish subjects that are always on his mind, his Let Me Know series. And this time it was, well, they're all fascinating, but this one was really fascinating to me about predictability. And although he didn't make it explicit, about where you draw the line, if you draw the line, between predictability and cliched writing. Boring stuff, trite, formulaic stuff. We've all encountered that, right? Like right now, it's book Trek. You don't have to go very far in the Star Trek fiction world to hit formulaic writing, something that is just by the numbers. And yet, I think we've all also experienced the other kind of predictability that he was mainly talking about in his video, which is comforting predictability, predictability that you like. Predictability that is actually a series, the strongest point in a series of books. What is the dividing line between those two? He raises the question, kicks it around a little, of course, mentions one of his own favorite characters, Jack Reacher, by Lee Child and company, where Reacher books are very gritty, they're very violent, but they have a kind of comforting familiarity to them, for want of a better term. He mentions that, and then Bookless Pete made a response video of a kind. I'll link both of the videos down below, expanding on the question and wondering about it, wondering what there is that causes the distinction between those two things. A couple of points in his video, Bookless Pete mentions magic, and that automatically intrigued me. That was like chum in the water to get me to fin my way a little closer and try to Jesuit this thing up and figure out what is actually the distinction, what is actually going on here. And the key way to do that, I think, is to concentrate on the series where it undeniably works, where that element of familiarity but not cliche is definitely present. One name that comes up automatically is P.G. Wodehouse, the world of P.G. Wodehouse, his various worlds, whether it's Blanding's Castle or especially Jeeves and Wooster. Which was characterized even in its heyday by a blowhard writer who nevertheless knew what he was talking about in this particular instance, as being an unchanging sunlit world, a world before the fall, a world of completely harmless innocence, where when you enter into it, suddenly the highest stakes you can imagine are that a ditzy girl might accidentally marry a newt fancier or something silly like that. They're sublimely silly books, and they take the weight of the world off your shoulders. And they do it over and over again in pretty much the exact same way. Bertie Wooster, an over-moneyed young man about town, and his over-moneyed friends run into trouble of some kind or other, and they need Bertie Wooster's incredibly intelligent valet, Jeeves, to get them out of it. You would think that a pattern like that would have maybe 2 books in it, maybe 3, but Wodehouse kept going back to that. Bookless Pete mentions that the last Jeeves and Wooster story is poor, but he also mentions that the author was dodderingly old at the time, and who can expect good work out of an old person? So that could explain it, rather than the format itself. Obviously, the framework itself cannot be blamed, since it worked for decades and still works for people today. Another name to come up, one that I want to come back to, is the Nero Wolfe novels of Rex Stout. I want to come back to that when we're examining the difference between just a cliche and comforting predictability. Bookless Pete mentions that his late father got to the point with the Reacher novels where it was just a Reacher novel. What'd you think of it? Oh, it was just a Reacher novel. Which, as Bookless Pete points out, ought to be the point at which you retire a series. That is, whether the person who says it or means it or not, that is a fatal verdict on a book series. If a long-standing fan can shrug their shoulders and say that, and yet I've heard people say that about many long-standing series. I think I feel that way about the Reacher novels. I don't react to them quite the same way that a lot of their diehard fans do. To me, they are cliched almost from the third book rather than predictably comfortable. I could say that about a lot of other things. Even, the Dirk Pitt novels by Clive Cussler. I could say the same thing about a lot of them, where you're asking a lot from me here, and you're not delivering anything new or interesting that's old. You're not doing either one. You are, in fact, writing just a rip-off of your own work. But whether or not you feel that way about those authors, my mind immediately started going to other examples. And one of the most fruitful grounds for those kinds of examples will be murder mystery series of one kind or another. Murder mystery series are they're designed to go to what we would now call go viral. They're designed so that the author of a murder mystery wants nothing more than for readers to write into the publisher. This was in a previous generation, for readers to write into the publisher and say, please give us more adventures of this character. Please give us endless adventures of this character. A jobbing writer, taking a year to hammer together a fairly solid plot, take 6 months to find an agent for it, take that agent 3 months to flog it around, it gets a very, very, very modest contract. And then all of a sudden, readers write in and say, we want more of this? Well, most writers live for that sort of thing. And we're going to get back to most writers as well when we get to our diagnosis scene at the end. But so naturally my mind turned to murder mystery series, like, for instance, the Detective Brunetti series by Donna Leone, which has gone on for a long, long time now. These are novels set in Venice. Brunetti's world has stayed largely the same. He is a happily married man. He is a wholesome family man. He's a dedicated police officer who works very much within the system of the Venice Police Department. But he has that little something extra. He knows lots of people, that's one thing. But he also has that little something extra where he will occasionally notice a detail that he can pick at that will unravel something for him. And that has stayed largely the same from book to book. And the same thing, I think, would be true in a slightly different way with the Amelia Peabody mysteries of Elizabeth Peters. That series is not ongoing anymore, but it went on for a long, long time, and it came close to the line of what Bookless Pete calls magic. In the first Amelia Peabody story, our heroine is young, she is fiery, she is fascinating and uncompromising, and she stays fascinating and uncompromising, but she stops being young. She marries her extremely dashing paramour Emerson, who's always got his shirt open to his magnificent chest with his flowing hair and whatnot. But Gray starts to enter into that hair, and they have a child, and then they have children, and then the children grow up, and the boy, young Ramses, becomes ravishing in his own right. Time passes in the Amelia Peabody stories, and yet they very much stay comfortingly predictable. Very much so. So obviously, time's passage isn't a fatal bar to whatever this quality is that we're talking about. Obviously, that's not true. Characters can grow old. Time can pass. For instance, on this channel a couple of times recently has come up the Flavia Albia novels of Lindsay Davis. Flavia Albia being the daughter of Marcus Didius Falco, who was Lindsay Davis's hard-talking private eye in ancient Rome for a long time, over 20 books. And Falco was slowly but surely, very imperceptibly at times, getting older as those books were going on. Same thing if we stick to ancient Rome with Stephen Saylor's Gordianus books, where we meet Gordianus when he is in his early 30s, and by the time the series is over, he's more or less an old man. Certainly in the ancient Rome sense of the term, he's an old man. But Brunetti, I think, would be closer than Amelia Peabody to what I'm trying to get at here, because Brunetti doesn't really change all that much in the books. Unless one of you is going to tell me that something horrible happens in the last two books. I haven't read the last two books. But there's one almost every year, and usually I read them and love them. I think it's only two that I've missed, or there are two along the way that I've missed. But effectively, nothing substantive changes in Brunetti's world. Co-workers come and go. Whereas in Amelia Peabody, things do change. She gets older, her family grows up, that changes everything. So rather than talk about her, I thought I'd talk about other examples, especially more prolific examples. Like, for instance, John Creasy's series, The Toff, which I don't think is in print anymore. I don't think anyone has the literary authority to write a new Toff novel. I don't think there's any demand for them. But once upon a time, they were terrific. There were, first of all, endless numbers of them. I don't even know how many Toff novels there were. And the Toff was the main character, and he's always the same. He has these adventures in the demi-monde, and he is largely ready to hoist a glass of champagne when the adventure is over. And the books themselves are quintessential escapist literature. You are pulled right away into a very twisty, very interesting plot, and the reading experience is over in an hour. And good luck trying to keep the Toff novels separate in your mind. Good luck trying to do that. If I can't do it, I don't know that many people can, and I can't do it. I can't even begin to do it. So, Creasy's novels would be an example of what I'm talking about, but there's also someone else who just came up on this channel, Leslie Charteris's novels about the saint. There are a lot of them, first of all, novels and short stories, a huge number of them, and they are incredibly consistent in tone from beginning to end. Again, I don't think that anyone has the rights to the saint now. I don't think that anyone would buy a saint anthology. No one is writing new saint novels, but again, for a long time, that character was popular. In book after book after book after book after book, you knew what you were getting when you bought a saint novel. I could add here something a little bit closer to the Reacher side of the equation. Ed McBain's 87th Precinct novels, where you've got the precinct house and you've got these regular characters, these regular people that show up in almost every novel, or the novel will concentrate on two of them, but there are four others floating in the background, or it'll concentrate on one, but everybody else is floating in the background, might get a line down the line late in the book or something like that. And the 87th Precinct novels are closer to the Reacher books because things do change in them, fundamentally. They don't seem to me to be quite as welcoming. I know that Ollie at Criminale would probably disagree since he loves the series. And I have come to a greater affection for the series over the last few years, but I don't think it's that kind of familiarity. Whereas if we stick with just police novels, I think probably the greatest example here would be the Maigret novels by Georges Simenon. An endless supply of them, just endless in their number. Slim little things, again, takes you an hour to read. Again, a nice twisty plot, usually in the Maigret novels, a twist at the end that you didn't see coming. Always the sense, I don't know if this is true, his autobiography certainly leads me to think that it isn't, and the one biography that I've read of Simenon leads me to think that it isn't, but nevertheless, you get the sense that he's paying attention on every page, rather than just being on autopilot, which would be fatal. I think we can all agree that whether we're talking about comfortable or cliche, it would be fatal if you thought the author was on autopilot. If you got that sense even for a single page, I think you'd probably be out the door. But when I think about the Maigret novels, I think about what is the difference here between comfortable and cliche, between reliable and rote. What is the difference? When does the spark go out of the eyes of the writer, if at all? I'd love to hear what you think about the long-running series that you go to, especially the ones you go to for comfort. What novels or stories in that series will ruin that feeling for you, even if the author can then get it back? What will ruin that feeling for you? So, let's think of a cinematic example here of a kind of familiarity that is home to thousands and thousands of virgins, and that would be Star Trek. That would be Star Trek, the original Star Trek, the real Star Trek, NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D. In the original Star Trek, you have Kirk in the center seat, the greatest captain in Starfleet history. You have Spock at his right hand, and you have McCoy at his left hand. And something happens. And these three and a whole bunch of other characters and side characters and guest characters and whatnot are put through their paces. And maybe they suffer loss. And then at the end, they're back where they belong. Kirk in the center seat, Spock and McCoy. And that's comforting. You can get all kinds of variety in between those two moments. But that's comforting. In a way that, for instance, if we go to the movies, Star Trek II was not. Star Trek III was not. Because that fundamental stasis was disrupted. Which might account for the fact that Star Trek IV was so popular. I mean, other things would account for that as well. Star Trek IV is a time travel story. Those are always popular. Star Trek IV is funny. That's always popular. But there was also the feeling of things finally being back where they belong. We won't say what happened to that feeling in Star Trek V. We'll pretend that Star Trek V doesn't exist. But Star Trek IV, all of a sudden, there's just a different feeling involved there because that stasis has been resumed. And that makes me wonder, when I think about Maigret, for instance, well, what is a Maigret novel? He encounters something, some detail. At first, it looks mundane. It intrigues him. It won't let him go. His curiosity won't give him a rest. He starts delving into it. It takes twists and turns. He goes to various locations. He is always in Paris. And eventually he figures it out. Doggedly. But with that extra spark of intuition, like Brunetti or these other characters, eventually he figures it out. And Maigret needed an hour to write one of these books. He needed less time to write a typical Maigret novel than you need to read it. Just a phenomenon. Sometimes happens in books. Doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It's just sometimes happens with authors, I should say. Every once in a while, Simenon would clearly feel the urge to shift things up. So Maigret would get shot or get blown up or something like that. But nothing fundamentally. He would end up in a hospital bed recuperating with people joking about how soon he'd be back on the job. Or he would be on vacation and he would solve a crime remotely from vacation, and then someone would joke, "Good, we'll see you in the office on Monday morning." Always you would get that return to the comfortable, no matter how much you distorted it. And the distortions were in the Maigret novels are usually very slight. Which brings me to Nero Wolfe. Brings me to Reg Stout, his Nero Wolfe novels. Star an enormous and extremely sedentary genius detective, Nero Wolfe, who has a brownstone on West 35th Street. He hardly ever leaves home. Never for business. He doesn't go to crime scenes. He doesn't go to testify or investigate or anything like that. He leaves all that to his man Friday, as Archie Goodwin is his name, another licensed detective who lives in the brownstone, much younger than Wolfe, far slimmer and more athletic than Wolfe, far more worldly wise than Wolfe, licensed to carry guns, whereas Wolfe disdains firearms or anything like that. Archie Goodwin refers to himself as Nero Wolfe's man Friday and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And Nero Wolfe lets Archie Goodwin do the legwork. And jokes with him sometimes about what an indefatigable ladies' man he is, but leaves it at that. There is a Nero Wolfe novel where his past from his boyhood in Montenegro crops back up. I think probably because Rex Stout had a guest over for endless amounts of whiskey, and they got to talking about Montenegro, and he just wanted to just back a dump truck up into a book and dump that into a novel. And all of a sudden, Nero Wolfe is hiking in the mountains, and he's hiding in basements, and he's not in the brownstone, and there's none of the conventional routines at all. And I don't know. That novel, in my opinion, fails completely. It fails completely. You can tell, first of all, you can tell the ending a mile away, but also there's no sustained drama. There's no page turnability, whatever that quality is. There's none of that there at all. You have to be completely dedicated to work your way through it, which is not true about any other Nero Wolfe novel. And I don't know if that is because Rex Stout was off his game or because Rex Stout was shattering his own predictability. In other words, I don't know if it's his fault or mine. But I know that I'm not being small c Catholic about this. I know that I'm not, because I'm willing to accept any kind of variation. There are times when the violence of the crime involved drives Nero Wolfe from his home, where he isn't able to be home in the brownstone, going up to the plant rooms and coming back down to his desk to open catalogs and whatnot. There are times when he can't do that. He's not out wandering in the countryside. He's hiding from mobsters or whatever. But the perfect example that I have in mind of that raises the question of what Bookless Pete called magic is a Nero Wolfe short story, which I compare with that novel where he is hiking in Montenegro. There's a Nero Wolfe short story where Nero Wolfe has just a routine errand that he wants to do. It involves a car. It involves a trip in a car. Nero Wolfe hates cars. He doesn't like to leave the brownstone. He especially doesn't like driving in cars. He doesn't know how to drive. So Archie has to drive him, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't trust cars not to explode. But there's a routine errand that they're going to do, and Nero Wolfe reminds Archie of that when they are in the office, and Archie tells him, "I'm sorry, I can't do it. You have plenty of other alternatives. You can hire a service. You can get somebody else to drive the limousine or whatnot, but I can't do it." And Wolfe wants to know why. And Archie Goodwin says, "Well, because I'm getting married," which Nero Wolfe refers to as flummery and simply refuses to believe will ever happen. But Archie Goodwin pulls out a marriage license from his breast pocket, puts it on Nero Wolfe's desk, and shows it to him. And Wolfe basically says, "Have you taken leave of your senses?" He just doesn't believe it. But Archie is being really smug, finally getting him over a barrel like that, snaps up the marriage license, and goes off, tells Wolfe, "I'm going to meet my intended at a lavish Christmas party uptown, and I'll be back when I'm back. So you're going to have to find someone else to do your driving for you for this one errand." And then we follow Archie Goodwin to that soiree, and the beautiful young woman is there, and a group of other people, and also behind the bar, a bartender dressed festively for the occasion as Santa Claus, who is pouring everybody's drinks. And at one point during the gathering, one of the men at the party keels over dead, obviously killed with strychnine in his drink. And when everybody looks up, the guy behind the bar dressed as Santa Claus is gone. So naturally, they and Archie and the police all immediately just assumed that the man who was disguised behind the bar as Santa Claus was the killer, and somehow wanted to kill this guy, wanted to slip poison to him. Who else would have had the opportunity? Who else would be sure that his identity was not known behind a Santa Claus mask and whatnot? I don't want to spoil the conclusion of the novel or the concluding action of the novel, but Archie Goodwin quickly discovers that it was Nero Wolfe dressed as Santa Claus behind the bar, and that he went there specifically so that he could see whether or not Archie was serious about leaving him to marry a woman. Wolfe doesn't like women. He doesn't trust them at all, and he doesn't believe the circumstance. So he goes to this soiree dressed as Santa Claus to hand out drinks behind the bar. Now, Wolfe immediately recognizes that he's going to be the number one suspect. Whoever was behind that bar is going to be the number one suspect. Hence, he disappears. He leaves right away. And when Archie Goodwin becomes aware of this fact, he and Nero Wolfe realize, well, the only way that you're going to clear yourself is to find the real murderer, which Nero Wolfe doesn't want to do because he doesn't like to work. He doesn't like to solve crimes. He'd rather just sit and play with the orchids or read catalogs or whatnot. Archie Goodwin has to badger him into action many, many times. And that's what the twist in the little story is, that in order to make sure that he himself is not suspect number one, he's going to have to find the killer. Now that is outrageous. The idea of Nero Wolfe spying on Archie Goodwin in a Santa Claus costume at a Christmas party is outrageous. That is not the normal routine of someone coming to the brownstone, sitting in the red leather chair and presenting their problem and a check to Nero Wolfe. That is the normal routine of a Nero Wolfe story. A client comes, Archie Goodwin and Nero Wolfe size them up. They decide whether or not there's a case there, and they proceed. And usually dead bodies start piling up. But that is completely different. And yet, it works. It works completely. It is not at all the same thing as taking Nero Wolfe entirely out of his world and hiking him around in the mountains with a hornbird on and a walking stick and whatnot. It's completely different from that. And that makes me think about what the actual architecture is of what Bookless Pete calls magic. Can we nail down what has to be there and what doesn't in order for that magic to be true and not to be simply rote cliche? And I honestly think that in this case, as in so many cases, Jack Reacher spoils things because you don't really get much of that with him. Also, Jack Reacher's the Reacher novels exist very much in the world of the 21st century, where writers and I guess readers think that it's not a successful novel unless a main beloved supporting character is shot in the head multiple thousands of times, then has their head cut off and refrigerated for a week, and then sent to the main character in a box or whatnot with a tape recorder in the mouth that plays the last words that they said under torture or whatnot. whatever utterly depraved thing the writer can come up with. I gather that is now the norm. And that is certainly the norm in the 21st century. So that if you have an ongoing series, by the time it's 10 books in, every character will have been assaulted. Every character will have been brutally tortured. Most characters will be dead. I don't get the appeal of that at all. But even though that fills the Reacher novels, the Reacher novels do still have this effect on readers, where they feel comfortable in them. I would argue that effect is largely an illusion. I don't think it's part of the conversation that we're having here, as is evidenced by the fact that a lot of Reacher readers that I know consider that the series became stale long before the writing duties were shared or taken over. There's only so much that you can believe. I don't hear this much, for instance, about the ongoing Jessica Fletcher novels either, because Jessica Fletcher does have, from the TV show, she does have a supporting cast. But if you were to stick to that supporting cast, you couldn't have 500 murders. You just couldn't. You couldn't do it. You would have to retire the series. You should retire the series. But if we leave those out, and maybe leave out a cousin case like the 87th Precinct, and just think about the things that actually are playing right in this aisle. So Nero Wolfe, The Toff, The Saint, things like that are just playing, very consciously playing in this aisle. Well, then what do we have that could account for this magic? The McGray novels. What could account for the fact that one after another have all very much of a muchness, and yet they're so comforting, rather than creating the kind of irritation that readers feel when they feel like a writer is just wasting their time. And I don't know, maybe it's the old theater kid in me, but I came up with basic elements, the foremost being the cast. The cast must not be violently changed. I remember when you're well through, you're well into the Nero Wolfe novels. One of the Wolfe has Archie Goodwin in the Brownstone, and they're goading him, badgering him to action and whatnot. Archie has an extremely privileged place with Wolfe. Understands him better than anyone, knows how to goad him into action better than anyone. But Wolfe also employs other people. He employs a handful, 4 other men that are private eyes, tail somebody or follow somebody or chase down records or whatnot. Errands that he usually views as beneath Archie's notice. Well, he would hire these other men for that. And well into the Nero Wolfe novels, one of those men is killed in an adventure. And I remember the shock that it was. You do not expect it. Even by that point, early on, there are like 30 books more to come. Even in that point, you don't expect it. But Rex Stout was very sparing along those lines. And I think that's the reason. The cast is comforting. It's that thing that I mentioned with Kirk in the center seat and Spock and McCoy. That cast is comforting. You don't want the feeling that cast is in permanent peril. You don't want the feeling that cast is ever going to be seriously diminished by a death. You really don't want that to happen. I think that is a big element. You can increase the cast with children, for instance, in Amelia Peabody's case, but you can't just start knocking people off, I think. And then another key element in the difference between something being predictable and something being rote is the location. And I don't mean that the location always has to be physically the same, but you need a home base. Whatever it is, you need a home base. In my opinion, in the Maigret novels, that would not be the police precinct. It would be his house. But you could follow that anywhere. I mean, it's the bridge of the Enterprise in the Enterprise example that I'm referring to, or the brownstone in Nero Wolfe's example, or famously, perhaps most famously of all, 221B Baker Street. Up the stairs to 221B Baker Street with the shag tobacco in the slipper and the bullet holes on the wall spelling out VR. You are there at 221B Baker Street enough times so that it alone can give you the feeling of home. That location, I think, matters. I in the 21st century have become even less tolerant of so-called propaganda than I was in the 20th century. So I really don't like it when that comforting location is a police precinct. I really don't like that at all. We don't need to make a social statement out of this, but the police in the United States, the police are not your friends. They are not Lenny Briscoe. But anyway, location I think has a lot to do with it, which again makes Reacher an odd man out. But in that sense, he would share a lot in common with the Saint or with the Toff. I think the familiar location and the familiar cast might have a lot to do with the popularity of police procedurals. But in addition to that, there are also rituals. I think rituals mean a lot. Whatever you classify as a ritual. And here we could bring Reacher in, the Reacher novels in, the good ones, let's say the first 10, or the Charlie Parker novels. You could bring in books that don't seem to fit with location or cast. You could bring those in with ritual. Because when it comes to a Reacher novel, you know what's going to get to him. If he's arrived at some town, some small town, and just ordinary things are happening. If you read the Reacher novels, if you're a fan of the Reacher novels, then you know what's going to get him, what's going to hook him. You know the kind of thing that's going to do that. And that, discovering what that kind of thing is a ritual. And rituals follow from there. Once Reacher is hooked, you know what he's going to do. You know what he's going to start to do. And that also is a ritual, and that's comforting. There are rituals in the Sherlock Holmes novels, of course. There are definitely the ritual that I mentioned in Nero Wolfe. Usually a client comes, proposes something to Wolfe. Usually Wolfe will say there's no case here, or this is beneath my notice, or I don't deal in matrimonial matters. Usually Wolfe will start to dismiss it, and then something will hook him, and he will realize there's more to this. And so on and so forth. Those rituals start to become a home base, a comfortable home base on their own. And those rituals, the element of ritual, not the element of location and not the element of cast, but the element of rituals may explain the presence of another name that keeps coming up with the subject of predictability, comforting predictability, versus just rote cliche. And that figure is Louis L'Amour. Leaving out his Hopalong Cassidy, leaving out the Sackett novels, just talking about Bookless Pete mentions the great standalone westerns. That if you've read Louis L'Amour, you've almost certainly come across one of them, and they have, as I've mentioned in an earlier video, an undeniable magic to them. But they don't ever star the same people. They're never in the same place. I think the thing that brings those in is this element of ritual. You know what's going to happen when Louis L'Amour gets the whole Louis L'Amour apparatus going. And that ritual itself is comforting. I think that it is. And you've got elements like that, core elements like that are reproducible. They are identifiable and reproducible. You've got cast, you've got location, you've got ritual. If you've got all three of those working at the same time in book after book after book, well, you've probably got a comfort read on your hands as a writer, which, again, you would think that every writer would want to have. It's a guaranteed paycheck. And yet, even the ones that start out that way, or they write a book that could become that, will often end up just killing people. Just, A beloved character ends up in a shipping crate. Why? For a shock jump scare at the end of one chapter of one novel. You wasted all that potential. You betrayed your reader's trust for such a little thing. Writer after writer, especially in the depraved 21st century, will do that and ruin the kind of comforting predictability that I'm talking about here. And why is that? Why will writers do that? Well, if I'm going to go all Jesuitical on you to come up with an itemized list of reasons why magic happens, which is a very Jesuitical thing to do, I'm of course going to give you a villain. of course I'm going to go all Manichaean on you and give you a villain. And that villain, of course, is writers. Writers are awful. They're just awful. The thing that allows a Rex Stout or a Georges Simenon to keep producing note-perfect variations on a theme, book after book after book after book, is because regardless of what they are in the rest of their lives, when they sit down to their writing table, they leave their ego at the door and realize, okay, well, I know what's expected here and I know what I can't do. I am writing a Petrarchan sonnet. Whenever I sit down to write a fill-in-the-blank book, the book that's paying the mortgage, whenever I sit down to write one of those books, regardless of what else I do, what else I write elsewhere, when I sit down to write one of those things, I'm going to check my ego at the door, my ego telling me that I am Tolstoy, that I am Homer, that I have something important with a capital I and full italics to say to the world. God help us. When really all you are is just an out-of-control tobacco addiction and a seriously sclerosed liver. That's all. That's all you are. But nevertheless, those writers who encounter something like that are not going to be the ones who sit at their writing table and say, yeah, but how do I make it new? How do I make it fresh? How do I make it vibrant? How do I make it speak to the world? The world needs my message. No. You can still vary things. Bookless Pete brings up that Agatha Christie, towards the end of her career, did vary up things. Who could be a more identifiable example of predictable versus wrote than a Christie for Christmas? What could be more readily identifiable than that? And yet, those later books by Agatha Christie, although they largely abandoned the comfortable whodunit formula that made her career, are really good. You will still read them. They somehow do not violate things. I would argue that the final appearance of Hercule Poirot does violate things. I'm very glad that, as far as I know, Miss Marple never got such an appearance as Curtin for Hercule Poirot. And again, there's an element there that comes up in Bookless Pete's video about simply the age of the author. You know, once you get to a certain point, is it possible that you've lost your fastball and you don't know it, and you are surrounded by people who are not going to tell it to you? That would be a shame. I think that would account for the senescence of a lot of series that were once predictable and fun. Would be the age of the author. But far more often than that, the age of the author is not a villain. Time comes for us all. Time comes for us all. So age is not a villain. But ego certainly is. And I think the reason why we don't have more of the really good kind of comfort reads is because of the ego of the author. Because they sit down at the table and they think, well, yes, this paid for my mortgage, it paid off my house, it paid off my second house, it got my kids through school, but I need more out of this. You're not involved, Seymour. You came up, you created a world. You were lucky enough, accidentally in most cases, to create a world, a room, a house, a precinct house, wherever, whatever it is. You created a place that your readers could consider home. Most writers can't do that, and even the ones who can usually don't. They don't even know they can. You did. And not only did you do that, but you were told that you did that by the readers who wrote into your publisher. So you weren't unaware of it. Once you do that, keep doing that. You can do other things. You'd have to be freakishly productive, and God help you if you want to be freakishly productive in the 21st century. But God help you if you want to be productive, period, in the 21st century. But for instance, to get back to the example of Simenon, He wrote Maigret novels, but he also wrote his so-called serious novels. And some of them are genuinely good. They're genuinely good novels. They're often reprinted, usually in the same... Penguin just reprinted them in the same line with the same livery as the Maigret novels. They aren't Maigret novels, and they are real. They are serious books. I would argue that Len Deighton did the same thing. He would come out with spy thrillers and, World War II thrillers and whatnot, but every once in a while he would write something like Winter that is an ambitious, very serious novel. Sometimes writers do that, but you can't abandon or degrade the thing that you are expected to do every year. You can, but you shouldn't, because that's a rare magic. That is a rare thing. And I would argue, not only should writers not ever abandon that, and also don't change it. Don't send Nero Wolfe hiking off in the Tyrolean mountains or wherever the hell he was. Don't do that. Once you know what the magic is, don't trample on it yourself. You're the only one who can, so don't do it. It'd be the same thing as if in the latest Reacher novel he gets a hand shot off. And all subsequent Reacher novels he's going to have a prosthesis. It'd be the same thing as if that happened. You don't do that. It's no longer your property when it's being enjoyed that way, preemptively enjoyed that way by legions of readers. Then it's not yours anymore entirely. It belongs to them as well, and you're doing something special for them. I would argue that not only should you not ever violate that, maybe kill off a third-rate supporting character like in a Nero Wolfe novel, but never anything more serious than that. There should never be a Nero Wolfe novel where Nero Wolfe has a heart attack, for instance. There should never be... none of the Jeeves and Wooster pastiche novels. That should just never happen at all. Of course, every violation of what I'm talking about has been done to Sherlock Holmes. At some point or another, every violation has been done, including a novel that I know I bring up on this channel all the time on the subject of fidelity to a repeating character, including a novel where Sherlock Holmes' examination of his investigation into the Jack the Ripper murders has the single worst conclusion you could possibly imagine. And the writer submitted it to, showed it to an agent submitted it to publisher sent it to readers, still went to print. Sherlock Holmes is vulnerable to anything like that, and in Star Trek fan fiction in the early days, the characters were vulnerable to anything like that as well, including sometimes really good things. There was a Star Trek short story called Mind Sifter that actually takes place over a large amount of time, over a year. Something that would never happen in Star Trek fiction today, and yet the story works really well. For the entire course of that story, those core items of cast and location are violated completely. And yet, first of all, they are restored at the end, and also it works. But in addition to how I think there should always be somebody appointed to an author who stumbles into something like this to make sure they keep doing it, or at least to make sure they know how reviled they'll be if they stop, I also think there should be somebody involved with an author at all times to tell them it's time to lay down your pen. Not just from this series, but from any series. It's time for you to stop writing. That's a tough thing for an author to hear, and most of them don't accept it. And most of the time, by the time you have been footing the bill for everyone's mortgage, everyone's rent, everyone's school, everyone's tuition for decades, you don't have anybody around you anymore who can say that you're going to listen to. So, when these things, the magic comfort versus the boring rote cliche, usually when the magic comfort falls apart, it's the result of either author's ego or author's age. And I'm against both. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on the subject. I thought I would dissect it as much as possible. It's not Bookless Pete's fault, but whenever anybody mentions that something is just magic, I want to start examining it. and I think I'm right about some of these details, especially location and ritual. That's what gives you the feeling of a book, whether the location and the ritual are someone getting drunk on their boat or a family together on the generous couch in the basement rumpus room, or a fast-talking Roman detective and his high-born wife hashing over what they know so far over wine. Whatever it is, those moments, coming back to those moments, having those moments in just about every adventure, that's what starts to create that magic. That's what starts to make it work in a way that is predictable, yes, but not an insult to the reader, I think. So anyway, those are just my thoughts on the subject. I want to know yours, of course, especially if you are hooked on some series. I especially want to know that. If you're hooked on a series, especially if it's an ongoing series, the main question I have for you, in light of this discussion, and I'll link the 2 videos that I'm referring to down below. In light of this discussion, if you're hooked on an ongoing series, like Detective Brunetti or whatever it is, and you go to it for comfort. So in other words, if I'm interested in your thoughts no matter what, whether you've never experienced this or not. But if you have experienced exactly what the 3 of us are talking about, that kind of comforting predictability, if you've experienced that or are experiencing it right now with a series, I want to hear from you what would ruin it. Would it be just that the series is handed off to a different writer? I haven't touched on that. Do you think that the writer is essential to this thing? I would once have said yes, but I read the George Smiley novel by John le Carré's son. I'm not so ready to say yes anymore. I'm not so ready to say that whatever magic we're talking about can't survive in the hands of another writer. Certainly, I can't say that about Star Trek fiction. When Star Trek fiction is really good, regardless of who's writing it, it's because they're tapping into the things I'm talking about, I think. But I want to know from you what would ruin it. Let's say for the moment it's not just somebody else writing it. What would ruin it completely? Death of a certain character? The maiming of a certain character? The disruption of that ritual? What if that ritual never happened again? Would that ruin it? If you don't mind anatomizing it for me, I would love to hear that. But I had to jump in on this discussion because it's just so fascinating. I love this very quality in so much of what I read. I love this very quality, so I of course want to know how it works and what you all think of it. So anyway, that's my response. I'll leave a link to everything, and I'll wrap this up for now. It's gone on way too long. Sorry about that. I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.